Thank you very much.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Indonesia's defence minister claims victory in the presidential election, the world's biggest single vote. Our other headlines: staring death in the face, the stark warning from the United Nations as more than 1 million Palestinians brace themselves for an expected Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. And Turkey's President Erdogan arrives in Egypt with the Gaza conflict top of the agenda in talks with President Sisi. Indonesia's Defence Minister Prabowo Subianto has claimed victory in the country's presidential election based on unofficial tallies. The early projections show him ahead of his rivals, two former provincial governors, with almost 60% of the vote. Candidates need at least 50% to win, otherwise a runoff will be held in June. Official results are not expected for some weeks. Well, the scale and size of these elections in Indonesia are like no other. It's the world's third largest democracy after India and the United States, and the biggest and most complex single-day election. More than 200 million people are registered to vote in the world's largest Muslim population. And these elections are also challenging in terms of the geography. Indonesia has more than 6,000 inhabited islands, stretching more than 5,000 kilometres from one end to the other, meaning it needs more than 800,000 polling stations. Well, to assist in this one-day marathon, 5.75 million election assistants are drafted in to try to run things as smoothly as possible. Voting is not compulsory in Indonesia, but the day is treated rather like a national holiday, and it makes it easier for people to turn out. And voters will need time to decide how they vote because there are two different systems in place. To choose a new president, it's a simple majority count between the three candidates, but voting for Indonesia's national and regional parliaments is done through a proportional representation system. Well, our correspondent, Robelin Perber, is in Jakarta for us. Robelin, what's the latest on the count? What are you hearing?
Right, so what I have now are preliminary results, which means a quick count, unofficial results. We do see the data by these think tanks saying Prabowo has won at 59%, 58%, Anies at 23 to 25% from different organizations, Ganjar at 16 to 17%. But I must say that these are unofficial results. The General Elections Commission, or KPU, has the right to say, as it is within their jurisdiction and authority, to say who has won. Now, as you said previously before, yes, the candidate needs at least 50% to win. And usually the ones that has a smaller vote will usually have an appeal, and that's usually how democracy works in Indonesia. But it is claims by those so-called winners. I've seen in my social media feed that they are already celebrating and congratulating each other by the winning team. But again, I must say one more time that General Elections Commission, or the KPU, has the final say to say who has actually won this election.
We understand your caution and we accept that. What is beyond doubt is young people make over, I think it's just over half the total number of voters. That's hugely significant, isn't it? What do the young voters want in this election?
Yeah, so we talked to these young voters actually today in Central Jakarta at these voting stations. But they are half is below 40 years of age of these voters. Now, they want to focus on climate change. Of course, Indonesia has big plans for 2030 to be carbon-free. They have bigger plans for 2060 to be carbon-free as well. And from one of these candidates, only Ganjar is saying that he will focus on the blue economy, as Indonesia is over 70% of it is water. And then we talked to the experts. They're telling us that none of these candidates are actually focusing on climate change or sustainability. So this is actually what the young voters want. They want climate change, although Indonesia is enjoying more electric vehicles brands, numerous brands now that are entering the Indonesian market. So more electric vehicles to choose from. Another would be job opportunities, of course. Unemployment in Indonesia at Q3 2022 was 5.86%, and it dropped to 5.43% at Q1 2023. And for this, I would say Mr. Jokowi's program to localize the raw material source in Indonesia is a way to open more jobs in the region. And for that, Prabowo is saying to continue Jokowi's legacy if he is to win the election.
Roblin, thank you for that, and we'll be back to you later in the day. Our correspondent, Roblin Purba, in Jakarta. Now, the rest of the day's news, and Pakistan's two main political parties say they'll form a coalition with smaller groups to run the country. This comes after last week's general election failed to produce a decisive winner. This announcement means that the party of the former Prime Minister, Imran Khan, will not be in power, despite his loyalists winning the most seats as independent candidates. As thousands of displaced Palestinians try to flee the city of Rafah, the United Nations is warning that an Israeli ground offensive could lead to slaughter. The UN's humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths, says Gazans are already suffering an assault that is unparalleled in its intensity, brutality and scope. Rafah had been the last refuge as Israel expands its operations inside the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian president has urged Hamas to quickly complete a truce deal to avoid further suffering. Well, exclusive footage shot by CGTN shows the remains of the headquarters of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in Gaza City. Israel says its forces discovered a Hamas tunnel running under this building, but the agency says it had no knowledge of what was below ground level. Israel has previously accused UNRWA of colluding with Hamas, prompting several donors to withdraw their funding. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Noor Harazin, in Rafah. Noor, just give us an update on what's happening there. And where do displaced Palestinians go now?
Well, a small percentage of the displaced people in Rafah do actually have the choice, do have the option of going back to Middle Gaza if they were citizens of Middle Gaza, cities like Deir el-Balah, Al-Nusayrat refugee camp, Al-Bureij refugee camp. So they do have the option of going there, back to their homes, even though it is not safe there either. But the majority, most of the people, most of the displaced people here in Rafah actually don't have that choice, don't have that option, as most of the people, the displaced people in Rafah are actually from northern Gaza, and the Israeli army has totally isolated northern Gaza from the rest of the Gaza Strip, from middle and southern Gaza, so they actually do not have an option. The only thing that they can do for now is just to stay here in Rafah and wait for something to happen. Actually, when talking to people here on the ground, to to displaced people, the first thing that they mention, an expected truce, an expected ceasefire. This is the only thing that actually Palestinians here in Gaza are hoping for and waiting for. So whenever you open a conversation about where will you go next, what's your options, the first thing they say that we are hopeful that there will be a ceasefire. And this is actually what is keeping people here in Rafah going on and living through this very bad conditions in Rafah. The fact that they still do have hope of a ceasefire or a truce agreement to be implemented here in Gaza between Hamas and Israel.
And officials in Gaza say the main hospital in Khan Yunis is now under siege.
Well, yes, here we are talking about the Al-Nasser Hospital, and it is actually the second biggest medical complex in Gaza after the Al-Shifa Hospital. It is serving the people of Khan Yunis and also the surrounding camps as one of Gaza's biggest hospitals. Over the past few days, the Al-Nasser Hospital have been besieged by the Israeli tanks. Footage that was published on social media by the activists, the journalists, the medical teams inside the hospital showed people thrown on the ground in front of the hospital, on the front gate of the hospital, on the streets opposing the hospital. Those people were killed by Israeli snipers, and the ambulances and the paramedics did not even manage to pick their bodies up from just a few meters away from the hospital. And this just shows how intense the situation is in the Al-Nasser Hospital. Just around an hour ago, Ashraf Al-Qidra, the spokesperson of the Palestinian Health Ministry here in Gaza, said that the Israeli forces are now collecting the people, the displaced people and the medical staff, and even the patients and the people who are injured and being hospitalized inside the hospital. They are collecting them and allowing them to take a safe route outside of the hospital.
Noor, thank you for that. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Rafah with the view from Gaza. The Israeli military is also striking targets to the north after a deadly rocket attack blamed on Lebanon's Hezbollah group. Let's talk to our correspondent Sarah Coates, who's in Tel Aviv for us. Sarah, just bring us up to date, if you would, on what's happening there and what we've heard from the Israeli military.
Hi there, Jamie. It's calling this an extensive offensive in Lebanon after, as you mentioned, a barrage of precision rockets were fired from southern Lebanon a few hours ago, landing inside Israeli territory. They hit a community called Safed. It's about 15 kilometres from this border, which is fairly deep for these kind of attacks. Normally they land a few kilometres over that border region. We do know that one person has been killed, 8 others wounded, one of those very seriously. They've been taken to Rambam Hospital in Israel's north, suffering very serious head injuries. We do know that the War Cabinet has since convened. They are discussing moves as to what should happen next. But the far right of Israel's government is already weighing in. The National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he is calling this a declaration of war, while the opposition's Avigdor Lieberman, he says that the red line has turned into a white flag, saying the War Cabinet has caved to Hezbollah. Still no actual claim yet from Hezbollah that it was behind this attack, but we do have some unconfirmed reports, Jamie, that a number of civilians have been killed in these airstrikes in Lebanon. So that is obviously very, very concerning. An update from the ground inside Gaza. The IDF says over the last 24 hours it's killed at least 10 Hamas terrorists. It says that it's located and struck terrorist infrastructure, also found weapons and explosive devices. Well, it released this video, which it says shows the leader of Hamas inside the Strip, Yahya Sinwar. He's reportedly been identified by the shape of his ears. The military says that this video shows him walking through this labyrinth of tunnels, with the IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari levelling a warning at Hamas, saying that Hamas leaders should know that they are on borrowed time, Jamie.
Sarah, thank you for that. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Turkey's President Erdogan has travelled to Cairo on his first trip to Egypt in a decade. The conflict in Gaza is expected to lead the talks with President el-Sisi. Speaking in Dubai on Tuesday, Erdogan said a free and independent Palestinian state within the borders of 1967 was the only solution to ending this violence. Trade, tourism and defence are also on their agenda. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki in Cairo. Adel, this is being seen as something of a landmark meeting between Turkey and Egypt. What might we expect?
Well, Jamie, if everything goes right here in Cairo, this could be a game changer for the Middle East, specifically the East Mediterranean region. Egypt and Turkey, since 2013, have been more or less taking stances on different sides across the region. In Libya, for instance, Turkey would support the Tripoli government backed by Islamists, while Egypt would support the eastern Libyan bloc led by Khalifa Haftar, the head of the Libyan National Army. Also in Qatar in 2017, when there was a diplomatic rift, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE and Bahrain severed ties with Qatar, while Turkey stood again on the opposite side. So in general, having these two leaders, two of the biggest countries in this region, standing together and deciding to cooperate in future relations, whether that be politics, regional crises, or even economy, this is definitely something that can see and help the region to calm a bit and steady, because standing on two opposite sides, if they work together, they can easily contribute in diffusing tension in many of these regional crises.
These two countries are seen as having considerable influence over Hamas. What hopes of their influencing the end of fighting in Gaza?
Well, when it comes to mediation efforts, definitely Egypt, because it shares a border with Gaza, where Hamas is, it has more of an influential power over Turkey. But because of the Islamist backgrounds and because of the historic stances for both countries, Turkey and Egypt, they both are strong supporters to the Palestinian cause. And as you've mentioned earlier, they believe that the only way out is a two-state solution with the...
I'm terribly sorry. We seem to have lost the line there to Egypt, but I think we got the gist of it. We might go back to Cairo a little bit later in the programme. That was our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki in Cairo. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, all is not well down on the farm. We'll be finding out why farmers across the world are taking their tractors to town in protest.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Indonesia's defense minister claims victory in the presidential election, the world's biggest single-day vote. Our other headlines, staring death in the face. The stark warning from the United Nations as more than 1 million Palestinians brace themselves for an expected Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. And Turkey's President Erdogan arrives in Egypt with the Gaza conflict top of the agenda in talks with President Sisi. Police in India have fired tear gas at protesting farmers for a second day as they try to stop them marching on the capital, New Delhi. The farmers have been demanding an increase in minimum crop prices and loan waivers, which they say the government promised to introduce back in 2021. This comes after protracted talks between unions and ministers ended in stalemate. Well, protests by farmers have been sweeping across Europe for months, with tractors blockading city streets in a show of anger and frustration over EU policies that farmers say are putting their livelihoods at risk. All this week, we're looking at what's behind these demonstrations with special reports from Belgium, Greece and Hungary. But first, let's take you to France and our correspondent, Tony Waterman.
Florent Sabin has run this 3-hectare farm outside of Paris for more than a decade. And not once, he says, has he used chemical fertilizers or pesticides on his hundreds of fruit and vegetable plants. He instead relies on nature to keep his crops healthy and bountiful.
We're going to see the clover, which brings nitrogen to our soils.
Nitrogen is an essential nutrient to help plants grow and maintain resilience.
It's going to feed the vegetables for the 2 years after.
Okay. But many farmers use a manufactured version of it, which, along with livestock production, is a leading cause of water pollution in Europe. Pesticides are also a problem, linked to biodiversity loss, soil degradation, and cancers.
I don't know any farmer who like to use pesticides. If they do so, it's because they're not sufficiently helped. The anger is, I don't have sufficient income, and you're telling me I'm polluting, but we're not giving them the means to change.
That anger has driven thousands of farmers to the streets across Europe in recent weeks, protesting what they say are costly, overly restrictive environmental regulations that give competitors an unfair advantage.
En fait, les Français, si je résume,
the French are asking for more ecology, healthier products that are better for the environment, but they're not prepared to pay for it, so they buy cheaper alternatives.
Meilleur pour l'environnement.
What worries me most is the piling up of standards that is making the profession more and more complicated.
The mass demonstrations just months ahead of EU elections have caught the attention of lawmakers in Brussels. A plan to halve pesticide usage by 2030 has now been scrapped, and the sector wasn't even mentioned in the latest emissions reduction recommendations.
Our farmers deserve to be listened to. I know that they are worried about the future of agriculture and about their future as farmers. But they also know that agriculture needs to move to a more sustainable model of production so that their farms remain profitable in the years to come.
Some experts say overly subsidizing the sector could lead to unintended consequences, and instead, lawmakers should structure regulation around a goal rather than across-the-board restrictions.
Make the goal the reduction in greenhouse gases and allow farmers to do that in the most efficient way possible. That is, let them choose the technologies that can actually get them to that point, or rather than to say, well, you just can't use, you have to use 30% less fertilizer.
Florent says he's not thrilled green regulation is being rolled back and that organic methods do work. He feeds 120 families in this community. But the benefits go far beyond just producing food.
We're contributing to make the water cleaner, to make the air cleaner, to preserve ecosystems and biodiversity.
And for that, he says, they must be fairly compensated. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris, France.
The U.S. House of Representatives has approved the articles to impeach President Biden's top border official, Alexandra Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, was accused of not doing enough to stop illegal immigration. Mayorkas says the blame lies with Congress for failing to fix the immigration system. Mayorkas will be the first White House secretary impeached by the House in 148 years. The former Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi has won a special House of Representatives election in New York. His victory has further weakened the Republican majority in the House, narrowing the gap between the two parties to only 6 seats. The New York seat became available after the Republican Senator George Santos was expelled due to crime and fraud charges. The Republicans vowed to win back the seat in November. Chinese New Year festivities in the US city of Chicago have included a concert that brought together Chinese and Western musicians. Our correspondent Dan Williams reports.
The Chicago Philharmonic Orchestra practices one final time ahead of a Chinese New Year concert. The orchestra is preparing to play a variety of pieces that highlight Chinese music and culture. Scott Speck is its artistic director.
I would say that anyone who's familiar with Chinese music, people perhaps who grew up in Chinese culture, will find almost all of this music to be instantly recognizable.
The China General Chamber of Commerce were one of the partners for the concert. The Butterfly Lovers Concerto is among the pieces that will be played.
The instrument is a long history, about 2,000 years.
It includes a solo on the pipa, a traditional Chinese string instrument by Chicago resident Yang Wei.
As a Chinese musician, I always hope I can bring my instrument to the world to combine with the Western music together and build something new. We always said the universal language, only music.
Showtime, and there's an extra surprise for the audience, a dragon dance celebrating the Year of the Loon. This concert is one of the main highlights of Chicago's Chinese New Year celebrations, and organisers hope events like this one can help promote cross-cultural understanding and friendship.
I think it's incredibly impactful to have these opportunities through music to connect culturally, to be exposed to different cultures and sounds. Like today, we're combining traditional Western instruments. We have, our orchestral instruments along with the pipa. And so I think it's a special treat for our musicians, and it's a treat for our audience members.
Well, I feel musicians sometimes are ahead of the curve in the realization that we are just all people. All of us are people, and we can all understand each other. And through the medium of music, we can bring ourselves together. And by playing this music, we make it possible for the whole community to feel that in a very palpable way.
This, a spectacular way for the city of Chicago to celebrate Chinese New Year and its cultural diversity. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
The headlines again. Indonesia's defense minister claims victory in the presidential election, the world's biggest single-day vote. Our other headlines, staring death in the face, the stark warning from the United Nations as more than 1 million Palestinians brace themselves for an expected Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. And Turkey's President Erdogan arrives in Egypt with the Gaza conflict top of the agenda in talks with President Sisi. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.